Everyone knows about big wars in Europe, Napoleon, then Hitler, now this guy decided to invade Ukraine. But people tend to forget about 30 million square kilometers of landmass right in the middle of the world map. This is the story of the worst genocides and other atrocities that happened when the civilized West divided dark continent. You'll love it, trust me. Let's first briefly understand the macroeconomic state of Africa. In north we have a rather developed region. In the east we have Islamic sphere of influence. And all the other Africa is just a bunch of random tribes that got stuck somewhere in Iron Age. But these losers were extremely important for Europeans because of one very specific resource. You think it was gold? Then think again. It was slaves. Europeans bought slaves from Africa and then sold them to America. See this triangle? You will never guess how it was called. The triangular trade. But then the unthinkable happened in 19th century. People came up with a crazy idea. Maybe, just maybe, trading humans like bags of potatoes isn't morally right. But as Confucius once said, after every crazy idea always comes a great idea. So another idea came to the minds of the Europeans. Look, they are a bunch of losers stuck in Iron Age, and we can't trade with them anymore. Why don't we just conquer them? This is genius. Just genius. So both Britain and France sent their armies to conquer some African tribes. Nothing could be easier, right? Well, their armies were wiped out. There were two main problems with conquering Africa. The single most popular thing that they traded for slaves were guns. So these losers that were stuck in Iron Age actually had European guns to defend themselves. But the most important problem was actually this tiny little cutie. Europeans were completely unprepared for malaria. The worst thing was that they didn't even know why they were dying. Malaria actually means bad air, because they thought that the problem was the air from the dirty swamps. The situation was so bad that 97% of Britain's soldiers in Africa were unfit for service. Isn't this great? This insect just saved the whole continent from the centuries of wars and genocides. Hey guys, why are you so dim? Look what beautiful tree I found. I swear, if you don't leave, I'm going to demolish your whole fleet. Fine, no need to be rude. But the tree is so beautiful and its bark can cure malaria. Spanish colonists discovered quinine that was produced from the bark of cinchona tree in the end of 16th century, but Europeans were able to extract the quinine from the bark only in 1820. It was great treatment against malaria, and large-scale use of quinine as a malaria prophylaxis started around 1850. European soldiers drank quinine in tonic water, but they hated the bitter taste. They started to add a mixture of water, sugar, lime, and gin to the quinine. This is how gin and tonic was invented. This was the first key to Africa. Europeans also invented new weapons, the pinnacle of which was Maxim gun, invented in 1883. There was even a poem written in its honor. Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not. This is true poetry. With these two keys, Europe was ready to conquer Africa, and this time African tribes could do nothing against the colonizers. But there was another problem. How should European countries divide the continent between each other? To not cause a big war, European leaders organized the conference with the purpose to divide Africa. Excuse me, but can I also participate? How many times must I tell you? Only European leaders are allowed to divide Africa. You are African leader, so you are not allowed. Not a single African leader was allowed to the conference, and the European countries divided the whole continent between themselves. Obviously, they gave zero thought to the idea of how their new borders can affect the native population. And here starts the competition for the worst atrocities. Some of the countries were brutal. During 8 years of emergency in Kenya, British soldiers killed more than 12,000 Mau Mau fighters. Around 100,000 Kenyans were tortured or maimed, and an additional 160,000 were detained in camps for years without trial. Women were routinely raped, while some men were castrated. This is brutal, but some of the countries were very brutal. When the Herero and Nama people rebelled against colonizers, Germany was ready to exterminate them all. After the battles, men, women, and children who fell into German hands, wounded or otherwise, were mercilessly put to death. In total, 80% of Herero population and 50% of Nama were killed. Any Herero found inside the German frontier, with or without a gun or cattle, will be executed. I shall spare neither women nor children. This is famous extermination order given by von Trotha. Other colonies in Africa were also terrible with different level of brutality, but nobody can even come close to this guy. The King of Belgium got only one colony in Africa. King Leopold the Second called it Congo Free State. Maybe he chose this name to mock the Congolese people. They were practically slaves. Every man had quota, and if he couldn't meet the quota, it was punishable by death. Also, sometimes his hands were cut instead of killing. And sometimes, to preserve the workforce, The Belgians cut children's or wife's hands. Congo Free State existed for decades. An outside world didn't even know what Leopold was doing. During Leopold's rule, the population was reduced in half. Some estimates suggest that 15 million people were killed. For comparison, there were around 6 million Jews killed during Holocaust. African countries gained their independence in 20th century, but the problems hasn't finished then. All the borders were completely artificial, drawn by European leaders on paper, which still causes many conflicts in Africa. Subscribe and share the video if you liked it, and if you didn't, subscribe anyway. You will like the next one.